The flight that changed everything. A quiet superstar in a world of noise. The early evening glow of New York City stretched across the sky as Keanu Reeves stepped into JFK International Airport, dressed in his usual understated style. A worn leather jacket, a simple black t-shirt, and a pair of faded jeans. Unlike most Hollywood celebrities, there were no bodyguards, no entourage, no flashing cameras following his every move. He preferred it that way. As he made his way through the terminal, a few sharp-eyed travelers recognized him. "Is that Keanu Reeves?" A young woman whispered to her companion, nudging his arm. "It is." The man nodded, his voice carrying a note of respect. "Man, I love that guy. He's one of the real ones." Keanu, catching their gaze, offered a small, polite smile before continuing toward the first-class lounge. He never felt comfortable with grand displays of admiration or the way the world treated celebrities like gods. He was just a man, trying to live a normal life. At the check-in counter, the airline attendant almost fumbled with excitement. "Mr. Reeves," the young man stammered. I just wanted to say I love your movies. You're a legend, sir." Keanu chuckled softly, offering a handshake. "Thanks, man. I appreciate it." Taking his boarding pass, he walked toward his gate, hoping for a quiet flight to Los Angeles. Little did he know, his journey was about to take an unexpected turn. First class, but not first-class behavior. The first-class cabin was a world of polished luxury, spacious leather recliners, personalized service, and the quiet hum of wealth. Keanu took his seat by the window, adjusting himself for what he hoped would be a peaceful, uneventful flight. The other first-class passengers were business executives, entrepreneurs, and socialites, people who thrived on exclusivity. Some had seen him board and gave polite nods of acknowledgement, while others, too self-absorbed in their own importance, barely paid him any attention. Keanu didn't mind. But then Gregory Halston stepped onto the plane. Gregory was exactly the type of man Keanu had spent a lifetime avoiding. A wealthy hedge fund manager with a presence as loud as his designer suit, he made sure everyone around him knew his name. His confidence didn't come from kindness or character, but from money and arrogance. As soon as he entered the cabin, he demanded attention. "Ah, first class," he announced loudly, tossing his expensive coat over his seat. "Now this is how you travel." Flight attendants greeted him with forced smiles, and some passengers sighed, already dreading the next few hours. Then, Gregory's eyes landed on Keanu. His brow furrowed slightly, then his lips curled into a smirk. He turned to the businessman beside him, making no effort to lower his voice. "Wait a second." Gregory chuckled. "Is that Keanu Reeves?" The businessman looked up, nodding hesitantly. Gregory scoffed. "What's he doing here? Shouldn't he be flying private?" Keanu, having heard him, remained unbothered. He simply smiled, adjusting his seatbelt. The mockery begins. Gregory wasn't done. He lived for the spotlight, even if it was at someone else's expense. Raising his voice so the entire cabin could hear, he said, "You'd think a big Hollywood actor could afford a private jet. Or are the John Wick movies not paying like they used to?" A few passengers chuckled nervously, while others shifted in discomfort. Keanu remained calm, as if Gregory's words carried no weight. "I prefer to keep things simple," Keanu replied coolly. Gregory let out an exaggerated laugh. "Simple? Now that's rich." He shook his head, still grinning. "I always thought actors lived in their own bubble of luxury. Guess you're just like the rest of us now." Keanu met Gregory's gaze with a calm, unreadable expression. There was no anger, no irritation, just understanding. He had dealt with men like Gregory before, people who believed that wealth made them superior, that status defined worth. Keanu simply leaned back in his seat, unfazed. And that bothered Gregory even more. An uncomfortable flight begins. As the plane took off, Gregory continued his loud conversations, propping names, bragging about his wealth, and ensuring that everyone in the cabin knew he was a big deal. He ordered the most expensive drinks, made rude comments about the food, and dismissed the flight attendants with a wave of his hand. Keanu, meanwhile, sat quietly, reading a book. His silence irritated Gregory. "You're awfully quiet, Mr. Movie Star," Gregory taunted. "Not used to flying with us regular folks." Keanu turned a page in his book, not even looking up. "I'm just enjoying the flight." Gregory's smug grin faltered for a split second. He wasn't used to being ignored. So he leaned in, his voice dripping with condescension. "Come on, Keanu," he smirked. "Surely you can take a joke." Keanu finally met his gaze. His voice was calm, steady, unshaken. "It's not a joke if you have to convince people it's funny." The air shifted. Passengers exchanged knowing glances, some stifled smiles. For the first time, Gregory had no comeback. But karma wasn't done with him yet, foreshadowing the karma to come. As the flight attendants moved through the aisles, one of them grabbed the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we may experience some turbulence during this flight. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." Keanu nodded calmly, securing his belt. Gregory, however, rolled his eyes. "Oh, please, I fly all the time," he scoffed. "I think I can handle a little turbulence." The businessman beside him smiled politely, but didn't respond. Gregory leaned back, taking another sip of his expensive scotch. "Besides, it's not like we're gonna." Then the plane shook. The sudden jolt made a few passengers gasp. Gregory's drink sloshed over his hand. Keanu remained calm, unfazed. Gregory let out a nervous chuckle. Guess they weren't kidding about that turbulence. Keanu turned the page of his book. Guess not. Gregory scoffed, shifting in his seat. "This airline needs better pilots. You'd think with what we pay for first class, they could avoid bumps like that." Passengers exchanged glances. Keanu, still reading, remained silent. And then, out of nowhere, Gregory winced. He clutched his chest for a brief second before shaking it off. Probably just indigestion, he thought. Probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing. The turbulence wasn't the only thing about to rock his world. Something far greater was coming, and the only person who could save him was the man he had just mocked. The height of arrogance. Gregory doubles down. The flight was cruising smoothly at 30,000 feet, but inside the first-class cabin, the tension was rising. Gregory Halston, the self-important hedge fund manager, was in full performance mode. He held court like a king in his domain, loudly discussing his latest business ventures, throwing around figures in the millions as if they were pocket change. The stock market is all about timing and intelligence," he declared, swirling his whiskey glass. "That's why people like me succeed and the rest, well, they just admire from afar." Passengers nearby exchanged silent glances. No one had asked for a lecture on wealth. Keanu, sitting a few seats away, continued to mind his own business. But Gregory wasn't content with just bragging about money. He wanted an audience. And more importantly, he wanted a reaction from Keanu Reeves. He turned toward the actor, a smirk playing on his lips. "You know, Keanu, I don't get it," he said loudly. "You're a Hollywood star, yet you're so quiet. No cameras around to make you look good." Keanu looked up briefly, meeting Gregory's gaze with the same calm, unreadable expression he had earlier. "I don't need cameras to be myself," he said simply before returning to his book. The response was polite, yet devastatingly effective. It was as if Gregory didn't even exist. And that infuriated him. Keanu's silent strength. Gregory's words had been loud and sharp, meant to cut, meant to provoke. But Keanu Reeves wasn't like most people. Instead of engaging in childish insults, he chose actions over words. As the flight attendants moved through the aisles, an elderly woman in the aisle seat struggled to reach for her bag in the overhead compartment. Before anyone else could react, Keanu stood up, stepped over, and gently pulled the bag down for her. "There you go, Mom," he said with a warm smile. The woman looked up, eyes widening with recognition. "Oh, aren't you?" Keanu nodded humbly. "I'm Keanu. It's nice to meet you." Passengers nearby smiled at the interaction. It was the kind of effortless kindness that had made Keanu so beloved. A young fan, no older than 10, sitting with his mother, timidly approached him. "Mr. Reeves?" the boy asked hesitantly. Keanu turned and smiled. "Hey, buddy. Could I maybe get a picture with you?" Keanu didn't hesitate. Of course. He bent down slightly, making sure the boy felt comfortable. The mother thanked him profusely, and the other passengers observed, their admiration for the actor growing by the second. But not Gregory. Gregory watched with disgust. His jaw clenched, his grip on his whiskey glass tightened. He didn't understand it. Why were these people so enamored with Keanu? Why did they admire him? He was just an actor. Gregory was the real success story here. Subtle hints of karma approaching. Determined to reassert his dominance, Gregory ordered the most expensive meal on the menu. When it arrived, he barely took 2 bites before sneering. "What is this garbage?" he said, pushing the plate away. "Do you expect me to eat this? This is first class, not some diner off the highway." The flight attendant, already exhausted from his antics, kept her professional demeanor. "I'm sorry, sir. Would you like a different meal?" Gregory sighed dramatically. No. I guess I'll just starve." Passengers rolled their eyes, but no one spoke up. People like Gregory thrived because others let them. He took another sip of whiskey, laughing at his own jokes, oblivious to how much he was annoying everyone. And then the first sign of karma arrived. The first sign of trouble. Gregory was mid-laugh when it happened. His expression suddenly shifted. He stopped talking. His fingers twitched slightly. He placed a hand on his chest and exhaled sharply, as if something had just clenched inside him. A brief silence. Then he shook it off. "It's nothing," he told himself. "Probably just a little heartburn." But his body disagreed. A few minutes later, as he took another sip of his drink, a sharp pain shot through his chest. He winced. This time, he couldn't ignore it. The pain intensified. His breathing grew shallow. His forehead broke into a sweat. Gregory's cocky demeanor faded. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Something was wrong. Very wrong. But his pride wouldn't let him admit it. So he forced another chuckle and muttered under his breath, "Must be the cheap airplane food." Passengers who had previously been annoyed by his arrogance now noticed something had changed. His face looked pale. His hand still clutched his chest. And then, Gregory gasped. The color drained from his face. He tried to stand up, but his knees buckled. His glass slipped from his fingers and shattered onto the floor. Passengers gasped. The flight attendants rushed over. Gregory collapsed into his seat, breathing heavily, his vision blurring. "Sir, can you hear me?" Keanu's voice was calm, steady, the voice of someone who had been in high-pressure situations before. Gregory could barely process what was happening. His blurred vision focused just enough to see Keanu kneeling beside him, his hand on Gregory's shoulder, steadying him. Of all the people on this flight, of all the people in the world, why did it have to be him? "Deep breaths," Keanu instructed. "Try to relax." Gregory tried, but his body refused to listen. "Chest pain?" Keanu asked. Gregory nodded weakly. "Any medical conditions?" Gregory opened his mouth to answer, but panic had stolen his words. He felt like he was drowning in open air. Keanu turned to the flight attendants. "Do you have an emergency medical kit on board?" "Yes." One of them rushed to retrieve it. Passengers watched in stunned silence. A few moments ago, Gregory had been mocking this man, and now Keanu was the only one saving him. Shock and humility began to sink in. Gregory felt utterly helpless. For years, he had believed that his money and power made him untouchable, that he was stronger, better, above everyone else. But none of that could save him now. And the only person helping him, the only person who hadn't hesitated, was the very man he had ridiculed. Keanu never mentioned the insults, never said, "I told you so." He just kept helping, because that's who he was. Gregory's eyes filled with something unfamiliar. Not fear, something deeper. Shame. For the first time in his life, he saw himself through someone else's eyes. Not as the powerful businessman, not as the wealthy, untouchable elite, but as a scared man who had spent years mistaking arrogance for strength. And now he was at the mercy of a man whose strength came not from money, but from character. Gregory, the man who always controlled everything, finally understood. He was no longer in control, and Keanu Reeves was his only hope now. Life and death at 30,000 feet. Gregory's condition worsens. The situation had gone from bad to dire. Gregory's breathing was shallow and erratic. His fingers twitched uncontrollably, his chest rising and falling in uneven, frantic motions. The sharp pain that had started as an annoyance now felt like a vice gripping his heart. His vision flickered, and for the first time in his life, he was afraid he wouldn't make it. The flight attendant, now visibly shaken, clutched the phone at the crew station. "Captain, we have a medical emergency. The passenger is in critical condition." The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "We're looking for the nearest airport for an emergency landing, but we're still about an hour away from the closest runway." Passengers gasped in hushed tones. An hour. Gregory didn't have an hour. The weight of those words pressed down on him like a boulder. This is how it ends, he thought. On a plane, thousands of feet above the ground, surrounded by strangers who only knew him as a loud, arrogant man. His pulse stuttered, his body betraying him. And yet, one person hadn't left his side. Keanu takes charge. Keanu Reeves, the man he had mocked, ridiculed, and belittled, was still there. While others hesitated, Keanu acted. "Gregory, stay with me." Keanu's voice was calm, controlled, a stark contrast to the chaos unraveling around them. Gregory tried to respond, but only a weak gasp escaped his lips. Keanu leaned in closer, his presence steady. "I need you to breathe. Slowly, through your nose. Let me guide you." Gregory's panicked eyes darted around, his body screaming in distress. "Follow my voice," Keanu continued, demonstrating slow, controlled breathing. In for 4 seconds, hold, and out. The passengers watched in silent awe. Despite the turbulence, despite the looming danger, Keanu was composed. And that calmness was contagious. The whispers that had filled the first-class cabin were now gone. Everyone was watching. Someone, one of the passengers, pulled out their phone and began recording. This was more than just a medical emergency. This was a moment. One where humanity outweighed status. Gregory's moment of truth. Gregory clung to consciousness, barely registering the sound of his own ragged breathing. His entire life, he had prided himself on being in control. Money, power, influence, none of it meant anything now. Not when he was at the mercy of his own body. Not when the only person truly helping him was the man he had spent hours trying to tear down. The irony wasn't lost on him. And for the first time in his life, he saw himself clearly. A bully. A fraud. A man who mistook arrogance for strength. Tears welled up in his eyes as humility washed over him like a wave. He struggled to form words, but he had to say it. Keanu deserved to hear it. With every ounce of energy he had left, Gregory looked at Keanu and whispered the words that had never come easily to him. "I was wrong about you." Keanu's response. Keanu didn't hesitate. He didn't gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't remind Gregory of the insults he had thrown at him earlier. Instead, he smiled softly. A reassuring, genuine smile. "Just breathe," Keanu said. "We've got you." There was no bitterness in his voice. No arrogance. No ego. Just kindness. And in that moment, Gregory understood. True strength wasn't about power. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about making others feel small. It was about compassion. And Keanu Reeves, the man he had belittled, was the strongest man he had ever met. As Gregory's eyes fluttered shut, surrendering to the exhaustion, he held on to one final thought. If he made it through this, he wouldn't be the same man who had boarded this plane. The power of kindness. Emergency response. The atmosphere inside the first-class cabin was no longer one of quiet luxury. It had transformed into a tense, makeshift emergency room. The flight attendant clutched the phone at the crew station, her voice urgent. "Captain, the passenger is deteriorating. His pulse is weak. We need an emergency landing now." The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Copy that. We are prioritizing a landing at Denver International. ETA, 25 minutes. Keep him stable." 25 minutes. It wasn't long, but to Gregory, it felt like an eternity. And in those 25 minutes, the man who had ridiculed, insulted, and belittled Keanu Reeves was kept alive by his kindness. Gregory's chest rose and fell erratically, his body betraying him in ways he had never imagined. Keanu never left his side. He continued holding Gregory steady, helping him control his breathing, whispering calming reassurances that kept him from spiraling into panic. "Just listen to my voice," Keanu said, his hand firm on Gregory's shoulder. "We're almost there. Stay with me." The other passengers, once silent bystanders, were now watching Keanu Reeves in a new light. The movie star they had admired from afar was now someone far greater than an action hero. He was a man who showed character when no one else did. They had heard stories about Keanu's kindness, but now they were witnessing it firsthand, and it was real. The public watches in awe. The young woman sitting 2 rows behind had been recording for several minutes now, capturing every moment of Keanu's selfless act. She wasn't the only one. Within minutes, the video was uploaded to social media. The caption read, "Keanu Reeves just saved a man's life on my flight. Forget Hollywood. This guy is a real-life hero." And then the internet exploded. Social media in real time. Ethereal Keanu fan. This is why Keanu Reeves is a national treasure. No ego. No arrogance. Just pure humanity. At Flight Witness 99. I was on this plane. Gregory Halston was the worst kind of person, and Keanu's style helped him. That's what makes Keanu a legend. At Celebrity News Now. Glory King. Keanu Reeves assists in mid-flight medical emergency. Passengers in awe of his kindness. Hashtag Keanu Reeves, hashtag real hero. Within minutes, the video was being retweeted, shared, and commented on by millions. By the time the plane touched down in Denver, Keanu Reeves wasn't just a Hollywood star anymore. He was a global symbol of kindness. Gregory's transformation begins. The wheels touched the ground with a heavy thud as the plane skidded to a stop. The cabin filled with relieved sighs as paramedics rushed on board, wheeling a stretcher down the narrow aisle toward Gregory. His face was pale but conscious. His arrogance had been stripped away. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, Gregory turned his head, his gaze locking onto Keanu. For the first time, his expression wasn't one of superiority. It was respect. It was gratitude. It was humility. With the last bit of strength he had left, he reached out his hand. Keanu took it without hesitation, and in that brief moment, Gregory saw the world differently. This wasn't just about survival. This was about becoming a better man. Karma comes full circle. The plane lands. As the plane touched down at Denver International Airport, a wave of relief washed over the passengers. The cabin, once filled with Gregory Halston's arrogance, now carried a different energy, one of quiet reflection. Paramedics boarded the plane swiftly, their medical bags in hand, rushing down the aisle toward Gregory's seat. Gregory, pale and exhausted, tried to sit up but quickly realized how weak he was. He wasn't the powerful man in control anymore. He was just a human being in need of help. Yet, as the paramedics carefully lifted him onto the stretcher, his hand remained locked onto Keanu's. His grip tightened. He didn't want to let go. With difficulty, Gregory turned his head toward Keanu, his voice hoarse but sincere. You didn't have to help me," he admitted. His eyes held something they never had before. Gratitude, regret, understanding. Keanu simply nodded, his expression calm, his voice as steady as ever. "But I did. No speech. No lecture. No, I told you so. Just kindness." And that hit Gregory harder than anything else. Passengers react. As Gregory was wheeled down the aisle, the cabin remained silent. But this wasn't the silence of awkwardness or discomfort. This was a silence of deep respect. Then, something unexpected happened. One by one, the passengers began to applaud. It wasn't for Gregory. It was for Keanu. For his grace. For his humility. For his unwavering kindness in the face of cruelty. The same people who had laughed at Gregory's insults earlier were now shaking Keanu's hand. "You're a better man than most of us," one businessman admitted, his handshake firm. A woman, who had remained silent for most of the flight, patted Keanu's arm. "Thank you for reminding us what kindness looks like." A young father, still holding his son's hand, said softly, "The world needs more people like you." Keanu, as always, remained humble. He simply gave a small nod, his expression unchanged. Because to him, this wasn't extraordinary. It was just what being a good person looked like. Gregory's final lesson. The moment Gregory was taken off the plane, the bright airport lights burned against his tired eyes. He had spent his entire life believing that power meant being feared, respected, and admired. But now he understood what true power was. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about status. It wasn't about stepping on others to prove superiority. It was about character. And Keanu Reeves had more of it than anyone he had ever met. As the paramedics rolled him toward the ambulance, Gregory lifted his head one last time. His voice was shaky but genuine when he said, "I owe you." Keanu, standing at the terminal entrance, gave a soft smile and shook his head. "You owe it to yourself to be better." Gregory felt his chest tighten, not from pain, but from the weight of those words. Because for the first time, he wanted to change. The internet explodes, and a new beginning. Viral sensation. By the time Keanu Reeves stepped into his hotel suite in Los Angeles, he had no idea that the world was already watching. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages, emails, and social media notifications. Confused, he finally opened his Twitter app. And there it was. A video, one recorded by a passenger on the flight, was now the #1 trending topic worldwide. The caption read, "Keanu Reeves just saved a man's life mid-flight. Pure class. A real hero." Millions of people had seen it. Celebrities, journalists, and fans have flooded the internet with praise for Keanu's selflessness. At Emma Watson, "If you ever needed proof that Keanu Reeves is the most incredible human being alive, here it is." At Christspence, "Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear leather jackets and fly commercial. Respect." At Time magazine, "Keanu Reeves proves yet again that kindness is the ultimate superpower. #Keanu Reeves, #Inspiration." Keanu sighed, shaking his head with a small smile. He hadn't done it for recognition. He hadn't done it for social media points. He had just done what was right. Gregory's redemption. Weeks passed. The world had moved on to the next viral trend. But for one man, that flight had left a permanent mark. Gregory Halston, the man who once measured his worth in dollars, had finally started measuring it in something else. His actions. His wake-up call at 30,000 feet had changed him. And now, he wanted to make it right. A public apology. One morning, news outlets began buzzing with an unexpected headline. Gregory Halston breaks his silence after mid-flight incident. The former hedge fund manager had agreed to an exclusive interview. As the cameras rolled, Gregory took a deep breath and looked into the lens. "That flight changed my life." He went on to explain everything. The arrogance, the insults, the medical emergency, and the man who had saved him despite everything. His voice cracked slightly as he admitted, "I was cruel, I was small, and I was wrong. Keanu Reeves didn't just save my life. He showed me the kind of man I want to be." Then came the biggest surprise. Gregory announced that he was donating a large sum of money to a charity that Keanu supported. "Because if there's one thing I've learned," Gregory said, "it's that kindness is worth more than all the money in the world." The internet erupted again. At Inspirational, redemption is possible. This story just proves that one act of kindness can change a person forever. At People magazine, Gregory Halston's transformation is proof that the right lesson, taught at the right moment, can reshape a life. But the real moment everyone was waiting for was Keanu's response. Keanu's response, pure class. Reporters chased Keanu down at an event, eager to hear his thoughts on Gregory's public apology. One finally managed to get a question out. "Keanu, what do you think about Gregory's redemption?" Keanu paused for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words. Then, with his usual calm humility, he simply said, "I just did what anyone should do. That was it. No long speech. No need for applause. No expectation of reward. Just pure, effortless kindness." And in that moment, the world was reminded why Keanu Reeves wasn't just admired, he was loved. Final message: the power of kindness. This story wasn't just about Keanu Reeves. It wasn't just about Gregory Halston. It was about all of us. It was about how one simple act of kindness, one moment of compassion, can change a person's entire world. Gregory had once believed that power came from wealth. But now he knew the truth. Power comes from kindness. Power comes from character. Power comes from the moments when we choose to be better than we were before. And in the end, that's what Keanu Reeves taught the world that day. Because being kind is always the right choice. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.